Welcome, everyone. You are joining the session, the panel discussion, which is called Collective Action, Unlocking SME's Ability to Combat Corruption and Monitor Public Funds. My name is Katya Lisova. I am a program officer at the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE, and I'm leading CIPE's anti-corruption and business integrity work in Europe and Eurasia. Let me quickly introduce CIPE, agenda for our discussion, our panelists, and then we move to discussion questions that were kindly provided by the organizers. CIPE is a unique institution that works to support democracy and to strengthen the private sector. CIPE was founded on the principles that economic freedom and political freedom are linked. A strong private sector needs flourishing democracy to work, and vice versa. Our work centers on building strong democratic institutions to create an enabling environment for business and entrepreneurship to flourish. Whether that be leading anti-corruption efforts, training entrepreneurs, helping local business on the economy, or building good governance structures, assisting at presidential debates focused on the economy, or building good governance structures, CIPE is there on the front lines, battling to strengthen and support democracy and its institution so the private sector can thrive. CIPE's areas of expertise include anti-corruption and ethics, enterprise ecosystem, business advocacy, trade, democratic governance, and corrosive capital. CIPE has been on forefront of supporting the private sector actors with addressing corruption collectively for over 2 decades. And SMEs are particularly vulnerable to corruption challenges. Therefore, it's particularly important to engage SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, into collective action efforts. Some of you may still refer to a comprehensive guide for business on fighting corruption through collective action that CIPE developed together with the World Bank Institute, Transparency International USA, and other organizations back in 2008. So the objective for today's panel is really to discuss and test 3 assumptions. The first one is whether collective action remains a robust way to organize the private sector, and specifically SMEs and other stakeholders, in a constructive manner to the benefits of the entire society. The second is that private sector and specifically SMEs have great potential for contributing to anti-corruption efforts and therefore must be engaged more consistently in various collective action efforts. And the third statement is that private sector-driven collective action initiatives can be effectively used to enhance transparency of public spending, and most urgently, during the COVID-related crisis and in its aftermath. The format of the session is a 90-minute discussion with 2 panelists centered around 7 questions that were sent with the agenda for this event. And I also told that the participants actually will be able to ask questions if they post them in the chat. So please do that, and we'll have some time at the end of the panel discussion to answer some of your questions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Ieva Lopekiene is head of the Clear Wave initiative from Lithuania. Ieva has been managing this initiative for the last 5 years. And before that, she supervised executive training at the Baltic Management Institute and was the executive director of the 2 foreign chamber of commerce operating in Lithuania. Welcome, Ieva. And our second panelist, Pana Ratananbanan-Kun, is the project director of the Thailand Private Sector Collective Action Against Corruption, or CAC. Pana has been instrumental in leading the CAC of almost 440 plus corporations to implement anti-bribery mechanisms and to fight corruption. He led the development of CAC's SME anti-bribery certification program to help large companies increase transparency within their supply chain. In 2017, Pana also led CAC's Citizen Feedback Project to help over 2,300 active citizens report poor services and bribery incidents in 3 government agencies. And early in his career, Pana worked for Shell for 20 years, managing the company's engineering and investment activities for various businesses in Thailand, Singapore, United Kingdom, and the United States, Welcome to the panel, both Yeva and Pana. And just for opening this, what we are expecting to be a lively discussion, I'm asking the panelists to do three things. First is to quickly introduce your initiative in a way, just providing really statistical data, and the most important salient facts about your initiative. Your founding members, years active, total number of members, various stakeholders involved, mission, vision, the level of SME involvement, and it's all within a minute or two. The second question will be, what do you consider being the main success of your private sector anti-corruption collective initiative so far? And the third question, what has been the main challenge for your initiative so far? And with that, Yeva, if you'd like to start, and then Pana will continue. Thank you very much.
Can you imagine that one day leaders of your state and the main executives from the public institutions, together with the business representatives and leaders of the civil society, start to spread one very clear message to the society? And this message is designed by your organization. Desirable? Yes. Possible to imagine? Maybe not, if you strive to do this alone. But I would say definitely yes, proved by our example, if you strive to achieve this through collective initiatives, such as ClearWave in Lithuania. When we look back to around 15 years ago, or 15 years after independence of Republic of Lithuania was rebuilt, the shadow economy heated up to 20% of Lithuanians' GDP. There were many illegal activities and high tolerance from the society towards that behavior. When we think about the corruption, the top-level managers, imagine 7 out of 10 managers would say that bribes can help to solve the business issues. So not surprising that our collective action appeared as a counterweight of a big scandal in a private sector related to the politician. And then representatives from different organizations, civil organizations and businesses gathered together and started to think, what can we really do to improve the situation? And the decision was made that healthy, normal business practice should be promoted and recognized by the consumers. So now our initiative has a very clear mission to raise the awareness of business, society, and government by conveying advantages of business integrity. We have a vision how we will achieve that. At the end, that ClearWave symbol would be as an aspiration of every enterprise. Naturally, because our members are recognized by the first social label, ClearWave, as you see in this slide. I would really rather go to the bar called local pub, where I see this ClearWave label on the door indicating that this business at least comply with the minimum standards of the Lithuanian laws. So by now we have 60 members, private enterprises, from very small to the large multinational companies. But small and medium enterprises have the biggest number in that. So there is around 66% of small and medium enterprises inside that. If we would move to this other slide and to think about our organizational structure, little by little it was developed that different stakeholders would be involved inside our organization to accomplish the mission. So here we see that our patroness is Her Excellency Dalia Grybauskaitė, former president of the Republic of Lithuania. We have official partners from state business control institutions. And I think this is a key success element allowing us to work as an entity and to be trusted by different stakeholders, at the same time to be as a trust carriers from one stakeholder to the other. To prove that, you can see pictures from our yearly action called No Country for Shadow, and started in 2012 as a very local initiative in the capital of Lithuania, when representatives from different institutions and from the government came into the streets, giving leaflets to the society and simply talking about the taxes. In 2016, we had all the members of the government dressed in our specially white prepared t-shirts and saying our message, no country for shadow. And the action took in all Lithuania, in all the cities. We counted 82 all week, full of interaction. In 2017, the state institution called Social Security Fund came to us asking to use our label to get approval from other governmental institutions to send the letters to every employee who was at risk to receive the minimum pension because of the taxes were not paid. Imagine 1,000 letters, or 12% of our workforce received this letter with our logo. So, this initiative really works as a tool to subordinate state institutions and leaders to declare important values, such as commitment for transparency, and then to act. If I would think about the challenges we faced, the initiative is really trust-based and self-controlled by businesses. This is a great success, but also the challenge comes here. How do we manage the trust of our initiative if our member with our logo enters into the scandal? We had 4 serious cases through all the history of Clearwave initiative, and really different decisions were made from postpone of membership to the final goodbye. But here we were needed to be very concise and thoughtful in these decisions, and also to communicate then later to the society, because we need really as initiative to walk as we talk. So coming to the end and thinking about the main lessons we learn, the most important are that the strength of collective action really leans on the involvement of a different level of stakeholders and ability to agree on the main goals, then to act. Secondly, self-regulation by businesses as opposite to poor volunteerism, or regulation which is rarely goes beyond the compliance, spark practices inside the businesses and inside business community, and it works well. So the next time you would sit and think how to improve certain situation, such as more transparency in particular sectors, I invite you to think of the collective action as a tool which can really help you.
Well, thank you so much, Eva. So, Pana, would you like to answer those questions? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So every one of us like to fight corruption or want to fight corruption. We all hate corruption. But how many of you understand the battlefield of corruption? Well, what do I mean by battlefield? Corruption doesn't happen by itself. Politician or public personnel doesn't engage in corruption by themselves. It involves many, many parties trying to facilitate, enable, and involve in exchanging benefits and bribes in different forms. If you understand the battlefield of corruption, you would understand that the private sector is a big part in the battle plan. If you look at on the left side, in order for politicians or people who receives benefits to channel the funds or the bribes to themselves, most of the time, the private companies are involved. And there are so many things, so many ways that bribery can be passed on. So the question I pose to you is, why isn't there more private sector collective action in the world? If private companies are engaging or are involved or have a role to play in solving corruption, certainly there should be more collective action in the world. The Thai private sector collective action against corruption, or CAC, where I'm from, we have been founded by 8 members of the trade associations here in Thailand 10 years ago. And to date, we have over 400 private companies representing more than half of the market capitalization of the Stock Exchange of Thailand as part of our member. We also have over 1,000 companies declaring intentions to join our collective action. And over the 10 years, we have evolved our activities, which is mainly around certifying companies that they have sufficient systems or internal systems in place to prevent corruption, to develop that into a journey for the companies. And what I mean by that is that for a company to join us, they can start with declaring intention to join, which is putting the minds together to fight corruption. After that, they can join our SME program, which is easier to get certified. And if they're a large company, they can also become large company certified, which have a more stringent standards. And after the large company gets certified, they can become chain agents, which is to recruit their supply chain to become CAC members as well. So our success has been that we are one of the largest private sector collective action in the world. And we also have a comprehensive program, not only the certification for large and listed companies, we also have a more simplified version of the certification program for the SMEs. And through the certification process, we are one of the few organizations in Thailand that have all the data of where the bribery risks are within the public agencies. So anyone can walk to us and ask if they are going to apply for this permit at this minister or ministry, will there be any bribery or will there be any risk of bribery? And we have that information collected. Our challenges has always been gaining more members. And to date, although our members have over 50% of the market capitalization in the Stock Exchange of Thailand, that still represent about 25% of all the members listed. So we need more members. The second challenge is, of course, with the COVID-19, there are challenges in attracting smaller companies. We called up SMEs and some of them don't even pick up the phone. And I'm assuming they either shut their business down or they just not concerned about the program at the moment. But ladies and gentlemen, I think that at this time, transparency, integrity is the most concern, at most concern for all of us. Why? Because of COVID-19, it impacts people, profits, and process. And allow me to explain. For the people, which is our employees, this is the most difficult time in a long time. We may be dealing with lower wages. Some of us have lost jobs. Some of our spouses have lost jobs. So the stress and the pressure to sustain the current living standards is a challenge. For profits, of course, every company is impacted by the shutdowns, the less in spending, the lower spending. So there's a struggle to maintain the profit. let alone minimize your loss. And thirdly, about the process. Remember when before COVID, we had formal approvals and sign-offs and authorizations on spendings on many of the formal process, which is high risk? Well, many of those things are now being done online. They're being expedited. They're being shortcut, fast-tracked. And so these process of check and balance is no longer is at their optimum level. So because of the people risk, the profit risk, and the process risk, this is the most important time to talk about corruption, transparency, and integrity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pana and Eva. So this is very strong statements, opening statements for our discussion. So as Eva and Pana, you mentioned, thank you so much for sharing your great success stories. They're different, given the different country contexts, but the challenges are to attract members, the challenges posed by COVID, but also the relevance of the issues that we're discussing today cannot be underestimated. And also what Eva mentioned is that, okay, when you get those members, how you ensure that there is this integrity within the collective action initiative itself. How do you deal with the members that sometimes violate the standards that they had committed to? So with that, I think our listeners, the audience now has a quite good idea about what each of your collective action initiative is and what the success and the challenges look like for you. Now, I would like to move to the questions and to thank you so much to the organizers of this event for providing some of the questions for in advance to stimulate this discussion. So we actually organized our discussion around those questions. And my first question to the panelists is about managing involving various stakeholders. So some of you already mentioned in your opening remarks that the idea of involving and maintaining this the consensus among various stakeholders has been critical. So can you please tell us more about, and for each of your respective collective action initiatives, how do you manage to bring various stakeholders to support your collective action initiative, whether it is in a formal participation or through informal participation? And so I mean primarily not just the business sector and various groups within the business sector, but also civil society members, international organizations, public institutions. So how do you do that? What has worked and what hasn't worked so far? Pana, would you like to start this time?
Sure. We've tried many things, of course. The common way to get consensus is to try to find a common theme or common benefit to everybody. And when you talk about corruption and you talk about the numbers and the impact, it's always a problem that is too far or too big of an issue to be personalized. Let me give you an example. In Thailand, we estimated that over the past 20 years, about $130 billion were lost due to corruption. If you ask the people walking on the street, what does this number mean for them? They have no idea. If you ask the civil society, what does it mean for them? They have no idea. You ask the business owners, what does this number mean for them? They have no idea. So one way of building consensus is to bring the problem down to a very ground level personal problem. And the way we used to explain that is that we broke down the $130 billion to apply it to what does it mean for each one of us, 70 million people in Thailand? How will their life change if this was used wisely and transparently? And why are we facing some of the problems such as flooding, poor air quality, traffic jam, poor services, poor infrastructure? Well, it's because of corruption. And that has been the consensus building method that we've used, which is bringing the problem down to everybody's quality of life and and problems, basically.
Thank you, Pana. So, Eva.
We work with really different stakeholders, starting from the private sector, naturally our members who needs advocacy for the needs as ethical business has problems to survive in unfair market conditions. We have also business business control institutions involved in our initiative under formal partnership agreements. And basically they have recommendations for the companies which want to join our initiative. But also we do have consultations and dialogue with that institutions. We have government and SEMAs included into our meetings, into our agenda in terms of that we give some proposals on the legislation needed. And also our council members are formed from various different parts, both from business, government, and also civil societies such as Transparency International or human rights. So they in fact give the final trust for the companies which want to join our initiative. Naturally, the question comes here, how can we manage this different interest of the stakeholders? As Panas very nicely explained, that sometimes the problems are too big to understand what an effect can be on the different stakeholders. But here I think that do we really have a different interests, or we just have the same one interest and we can deconstruct it into the small pain problems that every stakeholder has. So as Panas explained about the corruption, I would take that example such as taxes. I think no one likes to pay taxes, but we need to remind every year we have this no country for shadow action, that how the state is functioning and that we are all very related, meaning that what we put into the big wallet of the state, the things we get out. And for example, the state, the interest of the state and the government, they really want to have this wallet full. Yes, because they need to implement their programs, and they need to give back to the society and for the voters to make decisions they need. Then they start to push business control institutions that would more effectively collect those taxes. And we are happy because we want to push them as well. But more or less, we help them identify the problems we see and where potential problems are, in which sectors. And also here we find there is a lack of resources that public officials feel, but there is no money to take to improve because the wallet is empty. And by discussing with business control institutions, we found that not only businesses are bad, that they don't pay taxes, or the regulation is too complex that they just fail it, but also the habits of a society needs to be changed. And for example, if we would go down to any citizen, we go to, for example, to car service to fix a car. And when the job is done, we receive, we have a note where they need to pay 50 euros for the service. We ask a receipt as a proof that the service was made. And the company says, yes, fine, but we give you a receipt, but then please pay us 70 euros. Are you really ready as a consumer to pay this 20 euros extra? or maybe you would like to save. Lucky if you are the one who doesn't want to save, but the great majority of Lithuanians, they want to save. And they do this irrationally. Little by little, they are saving like this. And at the end, then that person wants the kids to go to the kindergarten. He finds that there is no empty space left because there is not enough kindergartens provided by the state. He needs to queue 3 months to get to the doctor. And suddenly here he understands that by paying taxes, it's not like they pay the wages to the public officials, but they also want to get the quality, the better quality of the public services like libraries or medicine or whatever. If we would go back to that, that business service, and this guy who wanted just to escape the taxes, at the end, he cannot go to the doctor when he needs surgery because he didn't pay social tax, or he cannot get any social benefits like for parental leave. Or at the end, when he gets old, he has very minimum pension. And if good car service works next to it with a clear wave label, yeah, it can really hardly to compete with that one obeying the rules. And the question here is, do we really want to encourage that fair market players, or to keep going and obeying to the ones who obey the rules? So complexity is high, but understanding how we can decompose it to the very simple messages, then we can work and to find the common agreement to act.
Well, thank you so much, Yeva, and thank you so much, Pana. What I hear from you is that even though these are the private sector driven anti-corruption collective actions, and very specifically in the case of CIC, they're focusing on, you know, the really certification of anti-corruption compliance standards, right? So on individual level of companies to raise their compliance commitments and compliance practices. And Eva, in the case of Clear Wave, the members that made commitments to pay taxes and be ethical and abide by the law. So all of that at the same time that each of your each of your initiatives is thinking about how to reach out to other stakeholders, how to communicate the importance of what your initiatives are doing. So, and to personalize, as Pana said, to the level that everyone can understand and identify themselves with the problem of corruption and engage on various levels with your initiative. So now I'd like to move on to the next question, and it's related to the first one, but I want to specifically ask you about how your initiative works with the government, giving the important role, of course, of the government, as we say, it's, you know, demand side corruption. And so how do you engage or communicate with the government, your mission, you know, whether it's advocacy or some other tools, and how do you do it in practical terms? I'm sure there are, we have people in the audience today that might be considering setting something up in their countries, in their sectors. And so I'd like to learn, how would you establish that type of communication? It can be, of course, very challenging. So, but we'd like to hear your experience. Who would like to start? Anna would like to start?
Sure. Let me give you two things that we are doing in terms of communicating with the government. As you understand that in the battlefield of corruption, the private sector is a main stakeholder in solving the problem. So through our certification process, our members, 400 plus members, have to assess their corruption risk, and the corruption risk is focusing on engagements with the government, whether it's licensing or permits or applying for services at each of the administration. So we have a good idea of all the pain points within the public sector, sort of within the private sector, whether it's in construction, imports, services, manufacturing, food, drugs, hospitality. All our members are identifying where the pain points are. Through our engagement with our members, they also explain to us that if we want to eliminate the pain points, here are the possible solutions. These are the process that has to be simplified. These are the laws that have to be addressed to remove the discretion. These are services that can be easily automated or outsourced to reduce the face-to-face interaction. And so through the data and the knowledge that we have on these two issues, we have used this to showcase that we are part of the solution to more or less of a problem. So many of the government wants to know what bribery risk they have in their organization. And they're handicapped by that because the normal citizens or the private companies are fearful in using their whistleblowing channels. Why? Because most of the whistleblowing channels here in Thailand, you have to put in your name, your citizen ID, your address, your email, your Facebook, your everything. So why would I risk myself giving out my personal information for the sake of just passing on the inconveniences that I have? So through us, the private sector can openly and freely share their pain points and solution, and we combine them and work with the government to relay these information. The government also received the information which is more in-depth and more comprehensive than what came through their whistleblowing channel. For instance, at one agencies, they have a box to handle the bribery and service complaints. On a normal month, they receive maybe 2 or 3 complaints. 2 years ago, we had set up an initiative called the Citizen Feedback Project, where our private sector collective action set up an inbox to collect the bribery information. Over the same period where this agency received 2 or 3 complaints, we received over 2,000 information or feedback on their services. And not only we can give them information about bribery and bad services, but we can also give them information on what is going well in their agency. We can provide information almost real time on which day, at which desk or which department has there been a bribery complaint or a service complaint. So these insights are valuable to the government agencies, and that this is something that they don't have with their current setup.
Thank you so much, Pana. So yeah, the Thai CAC has become just a great and critical resource for both, going both ways, for the members, for the private sector companies, and for the government, but also in being an intermediary and communicating these very sensitive matters in a way that takes this individual risk or reduces it. So thank you so much for this comment. And so before moving to Eva, I see that the questions from the audience started coming in. Go ahead, please post them. I'm receiving those questions, and we'll definitely leave some time at the end of our panel discussion to answer some of those questions. And now, Eva, back to you. The same question about the weight of communicating with the government, how you manage that.
Of course, when the initiative was just established, we were the first who started the communication with the government, because the institutions and other potential partners, they needed to know about us and what do we want from them. So by inviting them into our partnership, now we are into the situation that they are inviting us to be partners in their initiatives and in the dialogue or information exchange needed in order to get some decisions or on decisions on some legislative improvements. When I think about our No Country for Shadow action, because this is very huge and it's around 1,000 people involved every year. So we invite every different possible stakeholder from the state-owned state institutions to a round-table discussion and invite them to talk and to feel like they would be an organizers and that they would take the responsibility of this action to happen. And some years ago, there were no roundtable discussions for the different institutions to talk about this problem and to coordinate their activities. So we were like a platform where they could exchange information and join forces. Now they do have some committees that, and they now exchange information, but it wasn't before. So the communication is by partnership agreements, formal or informal, and which is also very important that we support the initiatives which are coming from the government. For example, Tax Inspectorate, when they announced Czech lottery, we were booming promoting it as it was ours because we were suggesting for them all to implement this. So this looks like very simple, but we needed to show that we are the entity that they could trust. And when we give recommendations to our members, there is also something that we can direct that, look, we are representatives of ethical businesses recommended by your organization, by the governmental organization. So this works for us as well.
All right, well, thank you, Eva. So we'll move to the next question. Time is running out. I mean, it's very passing very quickly. So our next question about transparency of public spending and to what extent this is a part of the objective of your collective action initiative or not. So giving what Pana mentioned, COVID being this critical time when transparency, accountability, integrity are forefront. And and there are, as we know, emergency funds coming into the countries from international financial institutions to support during this very challenging times. So to what extent your anti-corruption collective initiatives pay attention, focus, or are planning to focus on the issue of monitoring or transparency of public spending? Eva, would you like to start with this question?
When we think about public spending, we see the biggest problem of public procurement. And 30% of businesses which were involved in public procurement said that, not said, but they experienced the corruption in this section. So why we have obligation among our members, and it's written in the formal agreement when they sign for the label use of ClearWave, that they obligate for the fair participation in public tenders. This is first. And we also have a public procurement working group. We have regular meetings and consultations with officers of public procurement, the state institution. We had pushed for qualification versus price requirements in public tenders. And there were new legislation and law regarding this. We also suggested to have blacklist of suppliers, the ones who really obey the public procurement processes. And this list was established. Now there are 100 companies in that list, and they have no right to participate into public procurement for 3 years. And we also have some other suggestions. But when we think about directly about COVID-19 crisis, here I would be very proud, not especially about our initiative, but about Lithuania and its institutions itself, because we have open data of all the public procurement, not public procurement, it was under other circumstances, but all the purchases related to the COVID-19 crisis. So we have all the agreements, all the numbers, all the funds opened. And this is, I think, only 1 or 2 more countries did that. This is very important for us. There are very interesting data, of course, to find, but we have somewhere, if we are suspicious, to start from. So that's how we see this question.
Thank you, Yevapana.
Yes, public spending is very important in terms of the corruption risk, and of course, our members in private sector is involved in carrying out the majority of those public spending, because they're always infrastructure projects, procuring supplies and services for the COVID relief or the infrastructure initiatives. So our member is directly involved in public spending, and what we are doing is that we are always active in trying to invite more members in the construction sector to become part of our member. It's not easy. To date, we feel that we have many of the important players, but believe it or not, there are companies, large construction companies, that simply refuses to join because they see that bribery and corruption is still going to be part of their business, unfortunately. So we have quite a ways to go. Also with the SMEs, we have brought along about 24 SMEs that are suppliers in the construction industry, the oil and gas sector. These are also are important member as well, because most of the time, or in some occasion rather, SMEs are being forced to be the channel of bribes. So the large companies, they want to be transparent, they want to be maintaining integrity standards. What do they do to get everything going if they experience bribe demands? Well, they work through the agents, the SMEs, contractors to get the bribes through. So nevertheless, the SMEs are important to this equation. Another of our effort is through our partner, which is Anti-Corruption Thailand. They have been successful in appointing independent observer on the government procurement projects for large spendings. And what this initiative is, for each of the large procurement programs, the independent observers, which are from the private sector, are appointed to observe the procurement process, the bidding process, and the awarding process, to see if there's any fair and transparent ways of doing so. And we also part with Anti-Corruption Thailand in training the independent observers. And also ACT, which is working on the monitoring, has just come out with an artificial intelligence program to combine all the data of public procurement in Thailand and try to analyze and use that as a tool to combat corruption as well.
Thank you, Pana. So what I hear is that both of your initiatives, of course, I understand and the significance of the necessity to monitor, to work on transparency of public spending, because your members are involved, of course, in the public procurement process as well. And so that this building alliances with other organizations, for example, Pana, what you mentioned with Anti-Corruption Thailand, and instituting or establishing an independent observer. So I see these just excellent examples of how the collective action initiatives can perform that type of monitoring of the public spending. And then Yeva's example is it's a different situation, of course, very different from Thailand's situation, but also how you can utilize the databases to monitor public contracts, and also see inconsistencies and raise those questions if you do see them from your collective action initiative. So thank you so much. I hope the audience caught those great examples and that can be utilized in some other collective actions around the world. All right, moving on to the next question. So how do you see the role of your initiative to demand accountability from the public sector? And so this is probably the question, again, you touched on that already in some of your responses, in terms of how to, maybe you mentioned some examples from your advocacy or on participation and decision-making, and what expectations of your members in this process. Thank you so much. And so who would like to start? Pana, would you like to start now? Thanks.
Thank you. So this question is not easy to answer, because the private sector have very few authority, let alone any ability to demand accountability, I guess, from the public sector. However, I think we can create an expectation that because corruption is a threat to everybody in terms of quality of life, in terms of every businesses, in terms of unnecessary expense, legal risk, reputational risk, I think to point to these issues, it can be used to demonstrate accountability from the public sector. Another way of also demanding accountability is that I mentioned before that we conducted a citizen feedback project 2 years ago. What we did there was that we collected information from the people that went in to seek services from 3 public agencies: the Land Department, the Transportation Department, and the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. And we asked them a simple question, which is, during your transaction that day, were there bribes involved? And if they answer yes, we also asked them, was the bribe being requested, or did you offer it yourself? And the data we got back was very interesting, because over 60% or 2/3 of the data says that bribes were being offered, not demanded. So this just shows that the accountability has to work both ways, from the public sector as well as from the citizen and the private sector as well, because everybody is part of the problem, and there shouldn't be any finger pointing to the problem. And as I mentioned before, we also present ourselves as the solution provider to the corruption problem at the sectoral level or from the agency level. We can oftentimes identify which transaction within the civil service has the most corruption risk, bribery risk. We can identify which services is problematic, and which type of bribes are being asked for, as well as the departments or the people engaged in those agencies that are involved in bribery risk. So I guess we don't demand accountability, but we show that we can be part of the solution, and we show through data that, you know, there shouldn't be any finger pointing because everybody is accountable. Thank you.
Very strong message. Thank you so much, Pana. Eva?
The accountability of public sector is really important for everyone. And in Lithuania, there are many organizations, both from civil society and business associations, which really does a very good job on that. For example, our mother business association does it every day, while participating in the working groups, giving recommendations for new legislations, or also having ratings of the institutions. Our initiative rarely, but also are involved into legislation process. And I would remember one very one example. When we conducted a research with our members about the funeral services in Lithuania, because there were new law coming up, new regulation on this. And we found a very big part of the system was not functioning at all. And also there were many illegal services. So we send the data to all our partners and also to the government, to the ministries, showing the results of our research. And then we were invited to participate in a committee for this new legislation. So some amendments were made, some not. But for example, financial crime institution took this very seriously, and they made their own research, and we felt the circumstances, particularly in that business sector. So this is one concrete example, but as I mentioned, all the other institutions from public and private sector really does a good job in demanding accountability from the government.
Thank you very much for that. I particularly appreciate the point that both of you made about looking and working on both sides, right? So accountability goes in both directions, and to ensure that the private sector knows and follows the integrity standards and anti-corruption standards, and of course, then it's a much more credible position to and effective in demanding certain the same behavior from the public sector. So moving on to the next question, and here we talk about trust towards the private sector. So it's related to something that you already mentioned in some of your answers, but to what extent does your initiative focus on building trust between the private sector and the rest of the society? So has that specific, this objective has been something that your initiative focus on, to what extent? Eva, would you like to start?
So in general, our initiative tells a very good and positive story about business to the society in which perceive business as bad. So we do it almost every day with our initiative, and we want to switch this perception by showing that not all the business is bad, and also that you can support the good ones. And secondly, we want to improve all the business culture inside our country. So we really educate both sides, because changes needs to be in the society and in business itself. And we really educate a lot. And now in Lithuania, maybe almost everyone knows about about benefits of paying taxes. They already know that bribes are not okay. But if you ask if it's okay to hire a friend, they would probably say yes. So we are moving now a little bit from the very basic understanding to and we need to educate a little bit more about this subtle topics. So part of our initiative business is really education and building trust inside the society.
Yeah, and I know that, Eva, when I looked at some statistical data over time in the last 10 years that showed that the perceptions of the public are changing towards the private sector. So that's also very interesting to see how with all this awareness raising campaigns and of course support from the government and government institutions. So this is definitely, it's kind of a concerted efforts to also include and show the private sector can be a part of the solution and not just a problem. Pana, your turn.
Well, I think we use the same approach. As you know, the corruption equation is the supply side and demand side. And in Thailand, we always say that we can't wait for the government to solve corruption. I think there are some recognizable efforts. At the same time, there are many challenges in trying to improve the corruption situation in Thailand. One strong indication is our CPI score, which has been gradually on the decline every year. So I think what we can do as a private sector to gain trust and confidence is that, while you wait for the government to sort out the transparency issue, we are another strong force in changing this chronic problem. And the way we do that is to engage the big companies in Thailand to be more transparent. Of course, big companies are run by employees, Thai citizens, foreign citizens, and they have a very significant impact on whether or not they become transparent or they engage in corruption. Another thing that we do is through our process of certification program, we have been able to communicate the standards that we use to become of pretty widely accepted standards in the capital market. In the disclosure of every stock listing, if you go into the fact sheet of the stocks that you would like to buy in Thailand, there is disclosure whether or not that company is part of the CSE member or not. And when you're not a member, it raises a question whether or not you have transparency issues. You cannot join because you're not ready to be transparent. So just this simple disclosure tool is something that, can help with trust and the building the confidence of the investors. We also try to link between the benefits of our members to the greater society, because explaining to them that, well, we reduce corruption in the companies and so again, it doesn't bring down to the personalized level of everybody here. For an example, there was a company that we have that identified that one of their corruption risks is actually right in front of their factory. They have every morning cargoes coming in of raw materials, which is stuck in traffic jam in front of their factory. And of course, the area in front of their factory is a no parking zone, and therefore they are being extorted for bribes, or they have risk for being extorted for bribes. And through their controls and mitigation plan that we helped them put together, they were able to bring technologies as well as good mitigation standards to their drivers and transportation, such that nowadays no trucks are being parked in front of factories. And other than benefiting the company itself in terms of reducing the bribery risk, imagine that before you may have 30 heavy diesel engine trucks parked in front of your factory. That creates traffic jam, that creates pollution, it wasted energy, fuel. So corruption problem, once it's solved, it also brings up the quality of life of the people around it as well. And this is, I think, explaining the benefit to everybody brings trust of everybody involved as well.
Thank you very much. That was a very important discussion. And again, we see more and more international organizations and particularly OECD are focusing on the issue of building trust, trust in business and mutual trust in public sector, civil society, business, and public sector. Yeah, so this is kind of the key component on which the collective action then is built. So we have 2 questions from me, and then you have a couple of questions more so far, and we'll see. So please continue posting your questions before the end of the panel. So my next question is, to what extent your initiative has contributed to more open exchange of ideas, of challenges between the public sector, between the government and the private sector so far? So if you can use any specific examples or approaches that are successful, please, you're welcome to share them here with the audience. Eva, would you like to start this one?
I would here maybe think of the general changes into perception of our society and the government and the business through the work of our initiative together with also other stakeholders. And our very recent research about about how people perceive what responsible company is indicated that people think that responsible company at first needs to have fair relations and behavior and treatment with employees. It's 80%, 84% of people think of that. And surprisingly for us, in the second place, they think that responsible company needs to pay taxes. It was surprising for us because we never think that paying taxes is something under CSR policy that responsible business does. Every business needs to do. On the other hand, that indicates us that understanding of the importance of the taxes just increased, and the knowledge is very high among the society. And more and more people want to report any misbehaviors of the companies to the business control institutions. The numbers are increasing here, so the trust is improved by those business control institutions as well. And we have corruption map research which is made by Special Investigation Service every year. And it says that in 2007, as I mentioned, around 73% of managers said that bribes can help their business issues. Last year, only 3 out of 10 managers said that. And if looking back to 2008, around 70% or even more people said that corruption increased during the 5 years. Looking back to 2019, we have only 20% of people saying that. So the general perception, and not only perception, but the act of giving or receiving bribe also declined. So I think this is very important to mention and understand that all the activities we do together with our partners just really moves the situation better.
Yeah, more aware. Thank you, Eva. Anna would like to continue.
Sure. Currently, the CAC is constantly in engagement with the government sector and the agencies involved with prosecution and prevention of bribery in Thailand. Um, the abbreviation is NACC and PACC. And these two agencies have worked with us on many initiatives. What we're trying to exchange with them is that the idea that prevention and prosecution alone is not optimal. So imagine that corruption is a disease, and we're trying to cure the disease by prevention, which is a lot of education, taking this patient on vitamins and x-rays and blood samples. And we also, conduct surveys and assessments and indexes and try to understand the level of the symptom. But for some reason, the patient doesn't get better. Basically, the corruption is still there and the disease is still there. And so why is this happening? And what we're trying to exchange in terms of idea with the government is that other than prevention, you need to promote change as well. Why promote change? It's because if you just do prevention and the other thing you do is prosecuting the people that have offended offenses in the terms of the rule of the law, then you're missing a middle link, which is promoting change, which is if you compare it to a person, right? Once you have symptom of bad health, high blood pressure, then you prescribe exercise, you prescribe a healthy diet, and you prescribe a healthy lifestyle. We need the government to recognize this middle intermediary process, that their role is to promote change in agencies that have been receiving the most complaints, that have been identified as slow and has a lot of discretion and has a lot of complexity in terms of their rule and regulations. And we need these agencies to help push for change and promote change. And then they can always do the prosecution at the end. And so this is one of the most important work that we're doing right now in terms of exchanging this idea, trying to promote the 3-step, the prevention, promoting change, and the prosecution as a way of attacking the corruption problem in Thailand. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's a very, very important fresh statement. I think when we talk about the anti-corruption work, we always focus on assessment and the risk assessment of the detection, right, on the prosecution and the reaction side. But the element of changing, promoting change in behavior, and this is extremely important. And I think the way you put it, Pana, that, and it came also out in Eva's comments, that your initiatives are being those encouraging that change, right? Promoting the change, demanding the change, facilitating and encouraging. So it's a very important function of your work. And so moving on to my last question before we move on to the audience's question. My last question is about the role of the international community in establishing, maintaining, supporting the work of your initiatives. So you can just mention what has been the role, I mean, in the way when your initiative was first conceived and established, and maybe someone helped you along the way. You learn from someone who, someone in our audience can also learn from. Some of the resources, if you want to share some resources, that would be also great. Thank you so much. And who will start this time? I think Pana. Thank you.
Sure. One of our strong supporter and key partner is, of course, CIPE, the Center of International Private Enterprise. CIPE has been our founding partner over 10 years, and we hope to continue the relationship with CIPE in the future. We need more organizations like CIPE to take risk on countries trying to set up CAC. When CIPE started with us, they didn't know if we were going to become successful. They didn't know if the private sector would come together, but they have the confidence and the hope that this is going to be something that will help Thailand. And I guess they were right. We need more of such organization, whether it's in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, where else, elsewhere as well, to encourage the people that are trying to develop the private sector collective action to either have the funding, the resources, the help, the connection to make it happen. Recently, other than SIPE, we've exchanged dialogue with ADB, which is very prominent here in Asia. They, of course, welcome the compliance standards that we use, and we hope that they use our standard, our certification as part of their lending practices in the future. So while you have the supporters, we also need to create the demand. And ADB is an example of one such demand. If countries would like to lend, or if companies will use the funding for infrastructure projects, if they have the compliance standards in terms of transparency, integrity, that reduces the risk in terms of the lending as well. Other demand includes other countries being a partner in terms of recognizing the standards. For instance, if the Ukraine has a CAC of its own and Thailand imports product from the Ukraine, then it would be good if the Thai importer demand to see the CAC standards of Ukraine or elsewhere in that country. And at the same time, if we export products to Singapore or the US or the UK, then one of the standards that they should be asking for from the companies in Thailand is whether or not you have CAC or ISO 37001. So I would say that for the international community, you can help both ways. You can be a supporter of any collective action in any countries, or you can be the demand side, which is to look for standards or look for certification of these organizations and recognize it as one of the most important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pana. So yeah, ADB, Asian Development Bank, I'm glad you brought it up. Multinational development institutions and banks and their role in promoting this change and supporting collective action initiatives. And one of the resources that I mentioned during my opening remarks, that the guide for business on fighting corruption collectively that SIPE wrote in partnership with the World Bank Institute and Transparency International USA, it still is an excellent source. And you can see for more practical guidance and advice on how to set up collective action initiatives, private sector collective action against corruption initiatives in this guide. It's about 90 pages, but it's totally worth it. And so to Pana's point about Ukraine, for example, I just want to mention SIPE just partnered with the Ukrainian Network for Integrity and Compliance, UNIque, which is it's an organization that is something like CIC, and I know that UNIque is now trying to establish, develop certification standards and implement those. So definitely at SIPE, we are committed to supporting these initiatives, bringing those initiatives together, providing the learning opportunities, and also what we propose that there is certain recognition, right? So the standards, meeting certain standards by companies to ease and provide incentives to companies that meet those standards, that comply with standards and make all efforts to be ethical and act with integrity in accordance with the law. And now to Yeva on the role of the international community in your initiative.
I think Panas made a very nice remarks regarding the job that international community and international organizations can do in terms of supporting collective actions or directing one towards the other. In Clear Wave initiative, the important role was by two international organizations at the very beginning, because in 2006, Global Compact movement by UNDP started in Lithuania, and they started to spread ideas of CSR, of social responsibility of the companies. That was very fresh and new in Lithuania. And when the initiatives or initiative group started to think what can be done, they found in their material information about social labeling as a tool which can work to promote certain companies. So also Transparency International was one of our stakeholders at the beginning, one of the initiative group members. So their experience was also important here. And we never had, as I call, international expert coming to Lithuania and giving this knowledge, or any funds were never received by our initiative. It was really originated and developed by demand of the local market, and as understand by the locals operating there. So nevertheless, international organizations are very important in terms of giving their methodologies, for example, on how to improve accountability of small and medium and enterprises. As we did in with Transparency International, we have a tool for self-assessment, or recommendations by OECD. And other. Basel Institute does a very good job by supporting this collective action initiatives. So I think the role is very important. Then you have sometimes just moral support, or the knowledge or databases you can look for. But we really would like to scale this initiative throughout the countries, at least to the neighbors. And international organizations could be very helpful to identify the potential partners for this, to form the coalitions.
Thank you very much for your remarks. All right, so we are 7 minutes down to the end of our session. So we have probably time only for 2 questions from the audience at this point before closing, and me closing the panel with some takeaway messages from our discussion today. So the first question from the audience to you, do initiatives have any method or set of outcome indicators to assess the real impact in terms of integrity, lower corruption, better competitive environment, etc.? So indicators, right? How you measure success. Yeah, let me know if you want me to read it again, the question, or it's clear. Who wants to start? Pana, would you like to start?
Let me give it a try.
Sure.
Let me give it a try. Coming up with an indicator is more difficult than you think. Let me give you an example. There will be no private companies out there that will tell you that I joined CAC and I saved X amount of dollars from bribe that I used to give last year. So the data that we receive from the companies are how more transparent their employees have been because of the increased awareness, because of the clear procedures, because of the clear policies and code of conduct that they installed because of going through the CAC certification. And also through private conversation with our members, they do tell us that sometimes, as an example that I gave you about the factory that had the risk in front of their factory, going through the certification process actually eliminates bribery for them. Another example is that one of our certification item is to have a clear policy on gifts and entertainment with the government entity. And we also promote the extreme cases of having no gifts, receiving or giving at all. And we have companies that, through, again, discussion behind closed door, tell us that years before joining CAC, they were extorted of gifts ranging from wines, gifting baskets, vouchers, to pickup trucks. And I asked them, well, one pickup truck, right? No, they said 3. And I said, why? Because those people that came and extorted these gifts, they wanted it for charity or for a lucky draw. And they have told us that after joining CAC and putting extreme measures on no gifts policies, they were able to save all that money and use it for other purposes. So in terms of the generic indicator, it's going to be hard for us to come by, but we have individual success stories on how the certification program changes their way of operating the business and transparency within their organization.
Thank you, Pana. And I'll let Eva answer this important question.
We really look at some indicators we measure through our research or other researchers, such as perception in the society towards certain behavior. Like if society tends to ask the receipts, or if they want to report the misbehavior of the countries. So one is the changes in the society, and the second, we cannot measure in fact this, but I would make a remark that companies, they join our initiative for 2 main reasons. So one, they want fair market conditions. So this we can see by indicators, if it's getting better or it's getting worse. And the second, they want to strengthen their own reputation among government, business partners, and the most important, in the society, because they are their consumers and also their employees. They want the best people to work in their companies. So reputation management is very important.
Thank you so much. Well, I would like to thank our panelists for your great insight, for sharing your examples that are inspiring. And I hope they're helpful to others who are looking for ways to establish collective action initiatives. Thank you so much to the audience for your attention, for your questions. Sorry, we're not able to go to more questions, but you can always find information collective action initiatives on the websites for both the Thai CAC and for Clearwave initiatives, and a SIPE's website about our work in supporting collective action initiatives. And just in the remaining time, I would like to close this session by highlighting some of the messages that we discussed today. Well, I wanted to go back to that question, highlight the question that Pana mentioned, right? So giving the importance of collective action against corruption, why there are so many more of them currently than exist. You know, and the Basel Institute on Governance does an excellent job in putting them in a data set. There is a global data set, database of the collective actions, but at the same time, why not? We would like to see more. And something that Pana mentioned, this cross-regional communication learning. So this is one thing. During COVID, the issues of accountability, transparency, and the role of collective action is extremely important. So just collective action remains a very robust tool to fight corruption collectively, with the involvement from the private sector and SMEs. And these collective action initiatives can be used, of course, to enhance transparency of public spending, communication with the government, especially during these difficult times. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, for your attention. With that, our session is closed. Thank you very much, the panelists and the organizers of this excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.